Welcome back to the AI Insights podcast, where we explore the transformative world of artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Tony Stewart, Manager of Digital Innovation at Alithya. Today, I'm excited to still be speaking with Robert Gates, Principal Cloud Solution Architect for Microsoft. Continuing the conversation from our last episode, we'll be discussing Copilot adoption. This episode, we're transitioning from organizational level to end user adoption. With a wave of new AI tools, the user adoption story can look a little bit different from other technology migrations users have seen. Before we get started, can you give us a quick recap of your journey in the technology industry and a little bit about your role today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tony. So again, Rob Gates, one of our principal solution architects here at Microsoft. I cover a lot of the technology around the modern work tools, Teams, obviously Copilot for Microsoft 365, which I've been doing for a while now. And I've been in the field for, many decades doing lots of things like Teams and voice and collaboration type tools. So happy to join you.
Fantastic having you here. So we started to discuss it on our last episode, but following up on the idea of organizational strategy, can you explain the idea of people and process transformation as it relates to Copilot?
Yeah, I think when you look at Copilot, it is it's a personal aspect, right? It's a tool that I'm being given that's going to allow me to sort of amplify, accelerate, drive creativity. But it also gets weaved into my workflow and my processes, right? And so it is very close to the individuals, and that's change. And let's face it, change is hard, right? Nobody really is chasing down change and excited to do something different because it requires learning sometimes, or taking something that maybe is not as efficient as it should be, but is kind of you've learned how to do it to a point where you don't have to think, right? And it's just you're in autopilot. So it's really kind of important to get folks comfortable with change and evolving, and it requires employee kind of getting them engaged. Um, it does require a little bit of thinking about continuous learning and getting folks to kind of adopt and learn. This stuff is changing fast, it's evolving quickly. Um, I do think once you start seeing the power of like Copilot and that it can offload these tasks that are kind of boring or may take you unnecessary amounts of time, it also sort of inspires you to want to dig in, right? So there's a lot of focus on the people side because it's really impacting my daily work.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are your key strategies? We're talking day one end user adoption.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of really applying traditional like adoption and change management aspects, right? So we need leadership commitment. They need to show that this is important to the organization, explain the benefits, right? Driving that communication strategy out to the org, not just in a one-time scenario, but continually. Um, Having leadership even share their own successes of how they've used Copilot is super important. Um, Driving that employee engagement sometimes also requires having some champions across the organization that are eager to jump in and have them out in the field, kind of sharing and celebrating and getting others excited. But also being that kind of trusted friend to say, hey, all right, I got to do this Copilot thing. I heard you were doing some stuff with it already. Can you give me some guidance, right? And so building that community of folks. And that may even be like, using some internal tooling, maybe like Viva Engage or Teams, where we're creating these kind of collaborative spaces where folks can go in. So lots of like kind of traditional ACM adoption and change management type work, um, training continually, right? Having that kind of continual training, I think, is important. Um, and then again, clear communication, right? What's the benefits, the why, making sure people understand the impact, and a little bit of from our organizational conversation, but also identifying those business processes. Um, if you can help me deploy Copilot and use it, and I can take a process that's got friction or is giving me a lot of pain in my daily workflow, and if you can show me how to do that and now improve that experience, I'm going to be super excited, and I'm going to probably be chasing you to help me do it in more areas, right? So, it's definitely a lot of that, getting people excited, seeing the power, and then it almost becomes addictive. Like, hey, all right, great, you solved this, I need more.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the from our earlier conversation, the starting your adoption from a process perspective too. It's not just assign a license to everyone and tell them how it works and then they're good. And that to me starts to really add substance to something like a champions network. Are you seeing any organizations that have had great success from that standpoint of zeroing in on the process, and how does that relate to the end user story?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a critical facet, right? And even within Microsoft, we have internal champions program. We have um, different Copilot communities that are out there that people can join and be part of. And then, like, I'm a Copilot champion, right? And so I'm kind of advocating for my department and my org within Microsoft. um, it is change, right? And so just getting people trained and understanding, learning how to talk to Copilot in that more natural format is definitely an important piece.
Yeah, it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, obviously, but training and education with Copilot. You kind of mentioned it. What does that look like as far as what you experience with organizations?
Yeah, I guess there's two paths to that training aspect, and I guess the first is more of the out of the box experiences, right? So you just got the Copilot license turned on. You're starting to see it now in Teams, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You can go to copilot.microsoft.com directly and kind of engage into that dialogue with the tool. So understanding just out of the box, first off, where is it, right? Because as you're starting to see, like, it's everywhere. It's in Outlook. It's in different places in Outlook. Depending on where you go in Outlook, you're going to get different experiences. Because if I'm in Calendar, it's going to be fine tuned to look at and work with my calendar information versus if I'm in email, where it's helping me prioritize messages or find and respond to info quickly or summarize an email. So there's just understanding the out of the box experiences, and, like, in some of these things, these are high friction tasks that people do across the modern work tool sets. And, like, that's a quick win right there, is just getting people to say, oh, here's your email box. You get hundreds of emails a day. Here's how you can go and deal with those reply all email threads, or here's a long running email that's got a lot of details that you just need to get to the gist of because you're getting ready to go to a meeting. And, like, you start having those wins, and then that starts opening up the mind to, like, and the individual to kind of think a little bit further, like, hey, I see where it can work in the tools itself. Now, how do I apply this to other areas of the business, right? How do I do something in my process or my workflow for my department, my team, my org, kind of thing? So yeah, it's interesting. There's lots of ways to kind of approach it, but I like starting with the out of the box and then getting into those business outcomes, right? So how do I use the tools, and then how do I apply it in different contexts?
Yeah, I think that really ties into the continuous education or the continuous training aspect of it. There is that initial hurdle of how learning in general how these things work, and I think that's something you've mentioned before, that really it's a habit change. It's occurring to me, oh, in this moment I can talk to Copilot to do this, as opposed to go to this place and click and do these different sort of high friction tasks. But then, there's the ongoing training aspect of it. What happens when you find a really great prompt, or you really start to be able to dig into what the tools can do? I'm interested in, are you seeing organizations really communicate that strongly, or do they have systems that you would recommend for gathering that feedback to be able to share out to the other end users?
Yeah, I mean, it's done partly through the adoption kind of change management type programs and strategies organizations are doing. There's also feedback capabilities within the Copilot tool that the admins and folks managing the M365 tenant can take advantage of. From a reporting, we have a Copilot dashboard where leadership and some of the managers of the Copilot deployment, for example, can go in and see usage patterns and how well folks are kind of leveraging the experience. And then surveys and focus groups across the organization. I mean, it's important to kind of have a continual motion of collaboration, communication, sharing the benefits of Copilot, because it's it's a change in the way we work. And when you get busy, it's the end of the quarter, everybody's got to hurry up to complete a bunch of tasks and to meet the goals for the quarter. We're going to all fall back to our old habits and behaviors, and you potentially could get things done quicker by leveraging Copilot. And so it's a battle between old habits and kind of the new way of working in some cases. So it needs some time for people to you know really just break those old habits.
Deploying Copilot across the organization can be daunting and feel overwhelming, which is why starting with a well-planned pilot is a best practice. Alithya's Copilot Structured Pilot Program helps your organization develop an optimal plan for enterprise-wide deployment of Copilot, ensuring seamless AI adoption in daily workflows. Our experts guide you through the discovery and alignment for different personas, departments, and processes, providing comprehensive reporting on Copilot's effectiveness. This allows you to establish a clear vision for Copilot licensure scope, create a deployment strategy, and set the stage for a successful rollout and ongoing adoption across your organization. For full details, visit alithya.com/pilot. The link will also be available in the description box. I think that's a great, tied closely to that, the communication part of it. So as you gather that feedback, as users are starting to learn more or continue to learn what these tools can do, what are you seeing from a communication or a communication strategy standpoint?
Yeah, I think it applies really to a lot of the traditional ACM, adoption and change management methods, right? It's frequent communications across the organization. Celebrating success. So if a team, a department, was able to do something really impactful to that group or to the organization, making sure that's shared and communicated. We've actually had some great luck with doing some gamification to it, right? Where we've created challenges of hey, here's some cool prompts you can do, and here's how you can leverage them. So just having some gamification to it, where people could win prizes, could be an interesting way to approach it. It's getting people really to kind of weave it into their daily workflow, and so it's a lot of just people transformation aspects at that at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been heavily involved in and pulled into the idea of promptathons. So I think you tip the hat a little bit in terms of what are your thoughts on organizations that are considering that or starting to kind of combine all these ideas together?
I love promptathons, and the reason being is because when you think about Copilot, right, and you're having these natural conversations with a tool, it's not like I have a manual that I can go to and here's the 12 defined commands to go do something in an application. This is pretty wide open, right? And depending on the data, depending on what I ask Copilot to do, depending on maybe what IT has added into my account through integrations and customization, plugins, connectors, and whatnot, um, I need just time to experience the Copilot system, but I also want to see examples from others, right? And so we've done promptathons internally where, all of a sudden I'll see somebody write a prompt. I go, oh, I never really thought of asking Copilot for that. And then, of course, seeing other people's prompts and you're like literally copy paste them and then you try to go use them or tweak them a little bit. It's just a great way for you to see different ways to ask Copilot to get things done. I learned a way to kind of chain a couple different commands together in one prompt. Through something that somebody else was doing in a promptathon that I was in. So it's really interesting to just kind of see and learn, and it also creates that collaboration space where you've got folks joking around and trying to figure out how to leverage the tools.
I feel like I saw it really kind of add a lot of meat or sort of actionable things I could do as the end user to a center of excellence. Knowing who my champions were is always amazing. You can go and reach them. Having centralized resources, how is this configured? What integrations do we have? One thing that we saw, especially in the gamification section, was not just identifying an amazing prompt and building that library out, but also finding who was really great at building those prompts. And especially when that idea crosses persona. So if they're writing fantastic prompts for their job role, but then they're also a resource that you could reach out when it's, well, how do I do something similar to what I do in my day to day? Are you seeing similar type of experiences?
Yeah, and what's interesting is like one of the things that I kind of started to learn from some of the promptathons that I've been part of is it's actually forcing me to stop and slow down for a minute and think about what I do in my daily work. And when I can kind of understand, like, okay, here's the task that I typically do, here's the locations of the data that I need to help me get that task done. This is the type of output that I'm like trying to create with the task and the data that I'm working with. When you start to put it in that kind of content and you think about your workflow and some of this has come through those promptathons where I've seen how other people have been creative of kind of weaving that story together. It kind of makes you realize like you actually want to maybe slow down a little bit to go faster. And kind of what I mean by that is like the more time you kind of stop and think about what your goals, your objectives, what's the output, where's the data, what's the actions and the to-dos that are part of that, the more you can kind of spend time writing that prompt and defining those things to Copilot. And then when you submit it to Copilot, what you'll see is your output is accelerated. I've done scenarios where I've gone from a blank slate. Manager has dropped something off and said, I need you to go prepare for an event and we're going to need this content and we've got to publish a document. And I'm like, okay, great. And I'm starting with a blank slate. And I'll go to Copilot just as on a blank chat, go back and forth, leverage the data that I got in the tenant, and then I can kind of continue to weave through that journey in different prompts to kind of create an outline, to create a document, to use that document to create a PowerPoint. So it gets interesting, but it's you got to be able to explain to Copilot like you have a new hire, right? It's you got a new an intern or a new assistant to your team. You're not going to just say, "Hey, I need a presentation for X," and walk away. You're going to say, "Hey, here's the data. This is what we're working on. We've got a new program. Here's some resources for you. And this is a template, by the way, that we've used in other events. Go use that as your source," right? And when you think about it in that context, that's kind of the way you want to talk to Copilot, right? And give it the clarity that's needed to help you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the notion of slowing down in your own usage of Copilot does also slow you down in the sense of what is Copilot capable of doing, which then becomes something that is repeatable for those other personas. The more time I spend thinking through, okay, if I word it this way and I want it to output this way, when I work with someone that's entirely different business role, I can communicate those sort of prompt building strategies. Their prompt isn't going to be the same as the one that I use, but it really starts to build, additional training and knowledge around how do you build this well for all of your organization sort of specifics.
Yeah, and I may take something that you've done, but I'm going to tweak it for my own purpose, right? So that promptathon is a great opportunity for that.
You kind of mentioned it there, especially with the new hire and the idea of doing that work. Do you see a heavy utilization of promptathons as it relates to sort of an onboarding, maybe pilot new users onboarding to the pilot or new users onboarding to an organization?
Both. I mean, it's important to get people to engage quickly in the tools. So having those promptathons, having it as part of that kind of um, onboarding process is definitely an interesting way to go because you're empowering them with a bunch of tools. And so now they're trying to learn the organization, and maybe in some cases it's new to them and they're learning the capabilities of Copilot. So giving them the tools in addition to a promptathon on the hiring step is definitely a good approach.
Awesome. Yeah. In our work in that space, we've really been seeing promptathon as a way to continuously educate. It starts to encompass all of those components of ACM, but it also starts to drive just building out a prompt library, something that is tailored specifically to that organization. Are you seeing similar experiences?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've got that new prompt library support within the tool. I've seen folks create sort of SharePoint sites and other places to go to collaborate and have common prompts, and then obviously driving promptathons as well. Um, so having those prompts, I think, is helpful to see. It's almost like a starting point. it's like, oh, I didn't realize I could ask Copilot for that kind of thing, right? And so it gives me people a place to start, and then kind of they can use that to kind of build upon.
Yeah. What do you see the impact on an actual sort of pilot or adoption journey being from pre-promptathon to how new users come into the pilot once you've already run one?
Yeah, I mean, it helps accelerate, definitely. I think it's because it's a very personal function or tool, like just having that ability to see different ways to ask Copilot for different things, is definitely an important piece. So yeah.
Outside of the traditional sort of nodes of an ACM practice and really making sure you're checking all of those boxes and sort of building that into a single environment. Are you seeing any other trends as far as new organizations starting along this journey?
Yeah, and I think this is kind of where you start to have that multi-phased approach, right? There's getting comfortable with Copilot out of the box, right? As we talked before, being in Teams, Word, Excel, and just leveraging the out of the box capabilities. Then applying it to some business outcomes where you've got a defined process and you kind of see where you can weave Copilot into that to accelerate, amplify, or remove some friction. Um, and then kind of the evolution is really moving into those agents, right? Where you've unpacked and you've maybe optimized a process, but it's got repetitiveness to it where you're like, oh, well, I don't need to I can give like a Copilot agent like a clear path to how to do something. Here you go. Right. And so there's lots of ways to kind of tweak and evolve that.
Rob, thank you so much again for joining us. Stay tuned by following us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube Music. Also, don't forget to check out Alithya's structured pilot program offer at alithya.com/pilot. And thank you.